Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Have a bill before you today that came to me through a constituent that we found out that you currently basically could legally tamper with the odometer on a snowmobile, and we want to include that into current statutory language that doesn't allow that. And I do have a testifier with that'll give us some better clarification. We'll move this as quick as we can for all of you.
Mr. Franzen, welcome to the committee. Give your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Doug Franzen. I'm with the Minnesota United Snowmobilers Association. For several decades, perhaps several generations, it's been illegal to turn back the odometer on a motor vehicle. For some odd reason, it has not been illegal to turn back the odometer on recreational vehicles. And several consumers, I believe, have anecdotes that are willing to testify, if you won't, that essentially they've been defrauded by this practice. This just simply conforms makes it illegal to tamper with an odometer for the purpose of reselling a snowmobile. And, Mr. Chairman, I believe there is an amendment as well.
There is. Members will call the meeting to order. There is a quorum. And the chair will move House File 917 for consideration before us. Thank you for your testimony, Representative Schoen. There also is the 917A1. The chair will move that. Mr. Franzen, could you explain that amendment?
Mr. Chairman, this amendment simply updates the definition of what a snowmobile is. The language in the amendment comes from the DNR. The DNR does support this amendment. We vetted the amendment with Polaris, and they're still looking at it, but they anticipate no trouble. Also, with the ATVers, the four-wheelers, there is a problem that's developing in Minnesota. There is an entrepreneur in Wisconsin who basically jerry-rigs aftermarket parts onto ATVs and attempts to sell these in Minnesota to travel on snowmobile trails. The marketing in Minnesota is a factor that they're illegal to transport on Wisconsin snowmobile trails. We have about 25,000 miles of snowmobile trails through the state of Minnesota, and the vast majority of them, over 20,000, are what we call grant and aid trails, where individual landowners, farmers, homeowners, others, give snowmobile clubs permits to run across the land in the winter. They're very specific. They're for snowmobile use. They run contiguous one to the other. We know a number of landowners will rightly or wrongly get very upset about ATVs on their land. And just to be very clear that what we want on snowmobile trails, what the landowner has bargained for, and almost always this is for free, for no compensation. It's a community service. This is to protect the landowners. If they say a snowmobile can be here during the winter, and then when the snow melts, I can plant my crops, that's fine. That's a part of this community. I don't want ATVs on there because they can hurt my crops. So this ensures it takes care of that problem. We've also had 2 ATVs attempt to register as snowmobiles in Minnesota. The people who attempted to register were innocent. They did not know any better. But this clarifies this situation. And basically all parties involved seem to agree that this is a good solution.
Okay, members, I see Mr. Georgikas in the audience. He gave me a thumbs up on this. So someone here from Trails and Waterways, or Mr. Meyer, do you have any input on this amendment that Mr. Franzen said the DNR had checked off on?
Mr. Chairman, members of the record, Bob Meyer, Department of Natural Resources. We were contacted by MinUSA earlier this year asking our input for this language with their concerns of this latest addition coming into the marketplace, and we do support the language. We think it works well within our statutes.
Questions by the members. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Franzen, you talked about Polaris, and I appreciate that. Have you reached out to Arctic Cat?
Other questions or comments by the member? Anyone in the audience like to testify for or against the amendment? Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Fabian. I thought you already asked the question or made a statement. I'm sorry. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I asked the question. I'm waiting for the answer.
Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Mr. Franzen.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fabian, I have not had the opportunity to reach out to Arctic Cat as of yet. This has been moving fairly fast. We will do so immediately, and and I will give the results of that conversation. Yeah, please. They're good people at Arctic Cat. I will testify to that, Mr. Chairman. They're good friends of ours, and I will report the results of that conversation to the chair and to you, Representative Fabian, as well as any other member who would be interested in it.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Schoen.
Mr. Chair and members, just from my conversations with ATV folks, they're good with this too because they don't want the drama raining down on the ATV Association folks either. They want to be good citizens and they don't want to have any bad stains on them as well either.
Any further questions by the members? Being none, anyone from the audience like to testify for or against? There being none, we have to adopt the amendment. So the 917A1 is before us. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevailed. We have 917 as adopted. No one is here from the audience to testify. So any further questions on the bill as amended? If not, we'll be the chair renews his motion that House Bill 917 as amended be re-referred to the Committee on Commerce, Protection, Finance, and Policy. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevails. Thank you, Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, the next bill will be Representative Fischer. Representative Fischer moves House File 864. Representative Fischer, you have the A1 amendment. Do you want to adopt that now?
Yes, I would like to adopt that now, Chair.
Okay, the chair moves to adopt the 864A1. All in favor say aye. This gets it into the motion what the author wants. In favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevails. All right, Representative Fischer, to House File 864 as amended.
Okay, this is one of the bills going through to help streamline government. This is the work from a number of the agencies that have come together to address some commissions that are no longer needed or have expired. It does several things. Number one, on the first part, it addresses the Land Use Advisory Committee. It is no longer meeting, and it's been determined it is no longer needed. We also have another one that was Reinvest in Clean Energy Program Technical Committee, that commission that was no longer needed. A County Subsurface Sewage Treatment System Advisory Committee that has never met. On top of that, there are several others. There is the Interagency Native Vegetation Task Force that was never assembled. The Reinvest in Minnesota Clean Energy Program has expired and is no longer funded. And the Nuclear Waste Council is no longer needed. This was originally in response to the federal government looking for a depository site for nuclear waste from across the country, and it is one of the things that needs to be deleted. And there's also one small change that did not get caught in the original one going through, in the original amendment going through. There was a subsection that was left out on that I'd like to bring to our attention. Is subsection 116C.712 that has to do with this, and basically was the expiration date saying the council terminates when the Department of Energy eliminates Minnesota for their site consideration for disposal of high-level radioactive waste. It's got a subsection, it's subdivision 1 duty and subsection 2 expiration date. I'm wondering if that could be done as an oral amendment, or if you would like to have the language here that I could pass up to you.
So we're checking that with Ms. Taylor right now, how we're going to deal with that.
Okay. And I also do have people from the related agencies.
If you'd like to propose the oral amendment.
Pardon?
Give an oral amendment on the line in the bill, please.
All right. Would like to, as an oral amendment, delete section 116C.712, powers and duties. It would be subdivision 1.
Where are you at in the bill, sir?
This is something that was not on the original bill. It's something that I was asked to have added in by the agency.
Ms. Taylor, if you'd give us the language, please.
Mr. Chair and members, what I think Representative Fischer would like to do would be add a section to the repealer. So what we could do would be amend the A1 amendment.
Okay.
And then what you would do would be on line 1.4, delete and then on line 1.5, before R, insert and 116C.712.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Any questions on the oral amendment to the amendment, or as to the bill as amended? I'm sorry. So with that, House, the amendment, the oral amendment, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. Go ahead, Representative Fischer, to the bill as amended, 1864. Any further testimony?
No further testimony unless someone from the agency says something to add.
Questions by the members? Seems to be none. Anyone for or against the bill in the audience like to testify? There seems to be none. Any agencies, as Representative Fischer suggested? Seems to be none. So we will, Representative Fischer moves that the bill 1864 as amended be re-referred to the Government Operations Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. All right. So, Mr. Zemeta, are you here? Thank you, Mr. Zemeta, for coming and making life a bit easier for me. House File 2165, the chair moves the bill to bring it before the committee. And we have an oral amendment. Ms. Taylor?
Mr. Chair, members, I understand that the bill needs to be amended on line 2.1 to reinstate 15 and delete 16.
Could you, could you repeat that? They're going to separate them.
Okay. So, any questions on the oral amendment?
Say that again, please. Where are we on the bill, please?
Page 2,
Yes.
line 2.1, the very top page. Ms. Taylor, will you restate your amendment?
Sure, be line 2.1, reinstate 15 and delete 16. In essence,
We're
going back to the
original language. Then. So, all in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. Okay, Mr. Zemeta, I move the bill 2165 as amended. Go ahead.
Representative Dill, members of the committee, my name is Dave Zemeta. I am the Executive Director of the Minnesota Forest Resources Council. In 1995, Minnesota legislature passed the Minnesota Sustainable Forest Resources Act to promote the long-term sustainable management, use, and protection of Minnesota's forests across all ownerships. The act was last revised in a thorough way in 1999, 15 years ago, so it seemed timely with the governor's initiative this legislative session to streamline, update, and eliminate some obsolete provisions in this act. Since 1995, the Forest Resources Council has worked on a bipartisan basis with 4 governors and many legislators of both major parties to deliver numerous forest policy reports, as well as to develop and implement both site-level and landscape-level programs as mandated in the Minnesota Sustainable Forest Resources Act. In your packets, there's the 2013 report to the governor and legislature on the implementation of the Sustainable Forest Resources Act. So I would call your attention to that. There's an overview of the requirements that the council fulfills and of recent accomplishments on pages 2 and 3 in the report that are numbered 2 and 3. And then there's also a section on the state of the forest on pages 8 and 9 that provides very brief summaries of the status of forest health, health of the forest products industry, water quality in relation to forests, which are 3 major forest policy issues that the council is addressing. Call your attention to page 9, where the total wood harvest in Minnesota is described there. It's dropped from about 4 million cords in the mid to late 1990s to about 2.6 million cords now. So a considerable decline in harvest, which has got some implications for changes in the bill that I'll refer to later in the summary here. The Forest Resources Council considered all the revisions that you see in front of you, and they were passed unanimously by all council members and alternates who were present at the council's November 13th, 1913 meeting. Those members included Wayne Brandt from Minnesota Forest Industries, who's in the audience today, Don Arnosti and Jan Green from the environmental community, who were there as alternates for Susan Salterman-Adet and Jean Miriam, respectively. And the three of them served on the GEIS, Generic Environmental Impact Statement Advisory Committee from 1990 to 1994, had a major hand in the language in this act in 1995, serving on the roundtable that led to the passage of the act, and they agreed to all the revisions that you see. So let me just summarize a few of the substantive revisions. In 89A.03, Minnesota Forest Resources Council, Subdivision 6, it's lines 3.1 to 3.5 on page 3. There's a proposal to change the current annual report requirement to a biennial report. This would save a little money, but something in a few $1,000s. So there's some very slight cost savings in this proposal. In 89A.05, Timber Harvesting and Forest Management Guidelines, Subdivision 1, it's line 3.19. The heading is expanded from Development of Guidelines to Development and Revision. The initial comprehensive guidelines were developed in the late 1990s, revised twice since then. They're going to need to be revised again in the future. There's various obsolete deadlines that are proposed for deletion, 3.28 to 3.33. Under 89A.06, landscape level forest resource planning and coordination, if you look at lines 5.13 and 5.14, language is added to periodically recommend that the council undertake revisions of the region's landscape plan. To remain useful, plans need to be updated regularly. So that's the thought there. And in 89A.07, monitoring, subdivision 1, it's lines 5.30 to 5.31. Deletion is proposed to reflect the fact that the DNR commissioner need not report to the council information on current conditions and recent trends in the state's forest resources. That's not to say the commissioner doesn't do a lot of that kind of analysis and reporting. Just the point here is they don't need to report to the council. And they haven't done that in the past particularly, so it seems like a provision that could be eliminated. 89A.07, subdivision 2 is line 5.32. The words practices and compliance monitoring are replaced with the word implementation monitoring to reflect more the language that's been used over the years. In 89A.07, subdivision 2, lines 5.33 and 6.6, there are deletions proposed to reflect the fact that the DNR commissioner does not monitor silvicultural practices or the extent of silvicultural practices used across ownerships. Rather, the University of Minnesota has done that through the Interagency Information Cooperative that's referenced in this bill. So just to clarify that, that's that deletion. And finally, 89A.08, Research Advisory Committee, Subdivision 2, lines 7.7 to 7.8. An addition is proposed to charge the committee to communicate with the legislature on funding priority forest resources research activities. The thought there is this Forest Resources Research Advisory Committee was created by the Act back in 1995. It's been chaired by the Dean of the College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Sciences at the university, the head of Natural Resources Research Institute, and an array of other players on it. They provide about every 10 years important recommendations to the legislature, to the Congress, to Forest Service, and so on forest resources research. And the thought would be that it would be helpful to have a charge in here that committee communicate with the legislature on priority forest resources research. In addition, one last thing I should mention, there are some repealers in this act. Subdivision 2A, which involves requirements for reviewing timber harvesting and forest management guidelines, including peer requirements, would be removed. And let me explain what that is, because I don't think it's in front of your... was a number of deadlines that were from 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002, long past, obsolete. So the thought is to eliminate those. Then subdivision 4, let's see, where are we? Requirement for the DNR to monitor and report on riparian forests. Let me get the correct place where that is. That's in 89A.05. There was language that was passed back in, I don't know, it was about 1999 or 2000 that required the commissioner with program advice to the council, from the council, to accelerate monitoring the extent and condition of riparian forests, the extent to which harvesting occurs in those riparian management zones, seasonal ponds, the use and effectiveness of timber harvesting and forest management guidelines applied in riparian management zones and seasonal ponds. This information shall, to the extent possible, be consistent with the monitoring programs identified in 89A.07. Information gathered on riparian forests and timber harvesting and riparian management zones and seasonal ponds as specified in this subdivision shall be presented to the legislature by February 2001, and subsequent reports required in Section 89A.03, Subdivision 6. This information was presented in February of 2001. We did 2 years of riparian forest monitoring, found that the harvesting in riparian forests was much lower percentage than harvesting in upland forests. And at the recommendation of Environmental Organization Representative Jan Green in around 2002, it was recommended that the council no longer do this monitoring, because it was that the commissioner no longer do the monitoring with support from the council, as the results had shown there were fewer harvests done in these areas than in upland sites. Since then, we've had a significant decline in harvest, as I've mentioned from the State of the Forest report back on page 9 of our annual report, about 40% from the mid to late 90s to the current. So the need for this riparian forest monitoring is just not there for it to be accelerated relative to monitoring of forests in general. Monitoring of riparian forests still goes on, as does monitoring of other forests in accordance with the requirements in the Act. And so we're not talking about eliminating that. We're talking about eliminating this requirement for accelerated monitoring, which doesn't seem to be warranted. Then the final repealer is 89A.06, Subdivision 2A, and that relates to an array of obsolete requirements for reports from 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002. So they're all long past, and those reports were all delivered, and we're well past that. Mr. Chair, that summarizes my summary, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Representative Bugenius.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. The bill, by and large, I mean, it's recommendations by your committees, and I get all that until I get to the deletion of the monitoring of riparian forests, because that's the commissioner's responsibility, and for this group to recommend that the commissioner not do this feels a little out of place to me. It seems to me this should be coming from DNR and not from you. But the outcome is what I'm concerned about. There is a lot of cutting down of forests, particularly riparian areas in Cass County as we speak, potlatch land that's being converted to farmland for potatoes. So we have not had that discussion in this committee, and perhaps we should. But I am uncomfortable, Mr. Chair, with this piece of it. Other than that, just because it doesn't seem that this is where it should come from.
Mr. Zemetta.
Representative Wagenius, members of the committee, the DNR was present at the meeting, represented by Forrest Bowe, the Director of the Division of Forestry, but he represents the entire agency on the Forest Resources Council. His alternate, Olin Phillips, was there in his place at the November 13th meeting and was supportive of this deletion. So the DNR is very much represented on our council. There was unanimous support for this deletion for the reasons I just described. So it's not that forests aren't still being monitored by the commissioner or with oversight from the Forest Resources Council. This is just looking at accelerated riparian monitoring that was requested back in the late 1999 or 2000. So that's the thought.
Well, Mr. Zametta, it must have been when this first started. I think what I hear you say is that there was the need for accelerated because it was new. Is that correct?
There was a need at the time because there was a perception that there was more harvest going on in riparian forests than proved to be the case. There was concern on the part of environmental community members at that time in the late 1990s. You know, there was a lot more timber harvest back then through the mid to late 90s, and there was concern about the ecological impacts on those riparian forests for good reason. And then the accelerated monitoring that was done by the DNR showed that the actual level of harvest was considerably less in those riparian areas than in the upland areas, so that that level of accelerated monitoring wasn't warranted. And that's why the councils, and the DNR, didn't continue that, subsequent years.
Representative Wagenius.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Dill. I think my first question was answered by this interplay. But my second question was, how come we weren't alerted then to this big change that was going on in Cass County? Because we were talking, Potlatch is selling 60,000 acres, and apparently 20,000 of that acreage is potential conversion to farmland. And it does seem to me that we should have been alerted if DNR is indeed doing the monitoring that you are talking to us about.
Mr. Zametta. Well, first off, how much of the 20,000 acres is riparian? Because this particular repealer regards riparian land, right?
It's just
the accelerated monitoring of riparian land.
Representative Wagenius, committee members, the Forest I'm not going to speak for the DNR, and there's DNR representatives here who may want to speak to this, but for the Forest Resources Council, I will call your attention to a private land report that we delivered to the legislature as requested by the legislature back in January of 2013. I don't recall specifically talking about Potlatch's actions vis-a-vis the potato field conversion that you're referring to, but there were significant concerns raised in that report that we presented to the legislature about the impacts of changes in forest property tax on the actions of large forest landowners like Potlatch, like Mulpus, and some others, vis-a-vis conversion, leasing of forest land so that there's no longer public access to that forest land, sales of forest land, like happened with to these potato growers. So may not have notified you specifically because there's a lot of changes that go on and things happen at a smaller scale than we tend to deal with. But those concerns have been raised by previous council reports, and some prior to that as well, back to 2011, when we did other reports on parcelization and fragmentation of forest land, some of the concerns related to that. It's a long-standing issue for the council and for the department.
Representative Wagenius.
Well, just the general statements don't focus our minds as very specific examples. And I will note for the chair that this is an area full of wetlands and little lakes, maybe big ones too, and the water table is extremely high. So it's definitely a riparian issue in that area.
Is Mr. Bowe here from DNR? Who's here from DNR? Anyone?
Meyer.
Bob Meyer. Do you have anything you want to add to this, Mr. Meyer? No, nothing to add. Representative Agenius, are you offering an amendment to delete line 9.5 through 9.7?
I'm not going to offer an amendment, no.
All right, thank you. Further questions by the committee? I'm sorry, Representative Hansen.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Zemeta, just a couple of questions. This bill doesn't have anything to do with the Sustainable Forest Incentive Act. Right? No tax policy.
Representative Hansen, not in any direct way, no. And when I'll just leave it there.
Well, Mr. Zemeta, you may be coming forward as a council with some recommendations that maybe run parallel or mimic the ones that came from the state auditor's office that Representative Hansen requested, but this particular piece of legislation has nothing to do with any of that.
Representative Dill, committee members, that's correct. We are working as requested by actually a letter from Representative Dill and Senator Saxog with a group of stakeholders looking at potential revisions to the Sustainable Forest Incentive Act, in response to the legislative auditor's report. And that's important, and it's an important piece of work that we're doing, but it's not directly in this act, in the revisions to this act.
Thanks, Mr. Chair and Mr. Zemeta. I expected something was happening, but wasn't sure, and I'm glad that this is not the bill. This is more of one of the unsession efforts of policy.
Representative Hansen, that's correct, and we're looking toward emphasizing revisions to the Sustainable Forest Incentive Act in the 2015 session because there might be some financial implications to some of that we're trying to not bring up this session.
And, Mr. Chair.
Further questions by the audience? Representative Hansen, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was on a different subject, just, Mr. Chair. So I've looked at the report, and my question is, how do you deal with the southeast and the hardwood forest component? We see a lot about northern forests, but, I see a lot of oak and maple and cherry and walnut going for a variety of resources. So is there anything in the bill relating to that, and particularly how does it influence with climate change as we have a changing forest component?
Mr. Zemeta.
Representative Hansen, members of the committee, I would call your attention to page 6 of our annual report to the governor and legislature. There is a map that shows in color the landscape committees that the council identified in the late 1990s in response to the mandate in the Sustainable Forest Resources Act to subdivide the state into major forested landscapes, and those 6 that are in color are identified. You'll see that one of those is the southeast landscape. We completed a plan for the southeast landscape in about 2005, I think it was, or 2004. And we're in the process, thanks to some federal funding that we've been able to obtain through the Forest Service, to update that landscape plan in the southeast, working with a whole array of interests. I expect that climate change will get integrated into the revised plan, because that is a significant concern. And we've been working with an array of entities at the direction of the council on a climate change response framework for the northern and central regions of the state, and integrating climate change considerations into a revised plan for our northeast region, the 4 northeastern counties that we're coming to conclusion quite soon. So that's a concern that certainly is statewide and is being actively addressed, and we're certainly working on it. And I expect the Southeast Landscape Plan Committee revision effort will address climate change and changes in forest management that are needed, based on that.
Well, Mr. Zemeta, there's nothing in this bill that has to do with climate change.
There is nothing in the bill specifically that has to do with climate change. The only thing I would say about the bill is that it would continue the landscape level program, and the periodic revisions that are called for would make those forest resources plans more relevant on a regular basis, assuming they get updated appropriately.
Further questions? Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Zametta. I want to express my appreciation for you highlighting the decline in the total wood harvest. I have some concerns about the potential impact on that, particularly with respect to bark beetles. And as you move forward into what you're expecting in the coming years, I would appreciate maybe this committee or the council, where appropriate, to keep an eye on that, because I think the market has radically changed in the Northwoods, and it can have environmental impacts and could threaten the forest as a whole. So thank you very much.
Well, gypsy moth and forest age and health and everything is happening, as we saw just in my immediate area when the Ainsworth Lumber Company closed. That was 500,000 cords of wood that didn't get the standing in the woods for who knows how many decades now before anyone even gets a crack at it. And I mean, the forest health all over the state is enhanced when we do proper forest management. So I mean, that's the reason these things should keep coming before us. Further questions on the bill? There being none, anyone in the audience would like to testify for or against the bill as amended? There being none, the chair moves House File 2165 be sent to Government Operations as amended. All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. Thank you. Representative McNamara moves House File 2097 to be referred to Government Operations. Representative McNamara, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize. We didn't get a chance to further the discussion. Would you prefer it to go that way or lay it over? And I'm open to whatever you think, Mr. Chair. I believe, was it 97 that I just moved?
2097, yeah. And actually I'll amend my let's just hear the bill and we'll decide in a few minutes what we're going to do with it.
Okay, Mr. Chair,
go ahead with your testimony.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and House File 2097 is a bill. It's, as you are well aware, and many of the members here, that currently the Executive Council, which is made up of the Governor, the Lieutenant Governor, the Auditor, the Attorney General, and the Secretary of State, the five of them have to okay the leases for mineral exploration. And actually, twice in the last 4 years, the approval has been delayed, and it's been approved, but it's lengthened the time for this to happen. Once in 2011, when 77 leases were delayed from June of 2011 until May of 2012. And then again, in October of 2012, the DNR opened new bids for 31 leases, and those again were delayed until October of 2013. In both cases, the Executive Council moved to approve them. And basically, Mr. Chair and members, what my bill does is eliminate the Executive Council and puts the role of approving these leases on the DNR and the Commissioner of the DNR, where the professional expertise lies. It doesn't
eliminate the Executive Council, does it? It eliminates, it doesn't, they wouldn't be voting on this particular issue. Is that correct?
Correct, Mr. Chair. I may have said it wrong.
Yeah, I think you said you were eliminating the Executive Council.
That would be a different bill that some may support. I don't know.
You might be supporting the whole thing if you're amending the bill.
I don't know if you're talking about eliminating all five of those positions or just them acting together.
Make sure I understood that correctly.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and that would not be good because actually they do some very important things at different times. It's just in regards to these timber and mining leases. Mr. Chair, that's the gist of the bill. I think it's a good common sense thing. It puts it with the professionals who really have the expertise to deal with this issue. And I'm not sure, Mr. Chair, if either the DNR, I've got a feeling where they're going to be on the issue. kind of like Switzerland, I think, but I'm not positive on that. Or if somebody from industry or neighbors may want to speak for or against the bill. But at that point, that's my presentation. And thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Okay, Representative Benson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm relieved that we're not abolishing the governorship today, so that helps. But I still have some concerns about the bill. And Representative McNamara, one of my concerns has to do with really a problem we all know exists at the federal level, which many times is called the revolving door, where people in industry move from industry into government agencies that are given the responsibility to oversight of these industries. And I'm just wondering if you have any information as to how many people, for example, in the DNR or other agencies that would be affected by your legislation have previously been employed with, for example, the timber industry or mining industry in our state.
Representative McNamara.
I do not.
And, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if representative of the DNR would have that information, but I think it would be very useful to find out if they do have that information, and secondly, whether they can supply it for us.
I don't see anyone racing forward at this moment from the DNR to talk about their boss not being able to decide on something.
Well, Mr. Chairman, and
Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative McNamara, this is a severe problem at the federal level. And we all pride ourselves here in the state of Minnesota of not having revolving doors. But I really don't know in these two industries whether it is a problem or not. And it's a question that would determine my support or opposition to your proposed legislation. But if I could go on, Mr. Chair, I have a couple other questions. One of them has to do with the concern I have about political accountability. The bureaucracies in our state, as you say, are staffed by people who are many times, most always, experts in the areas in which they are working. But when something goes wrong, it's the political leadership of the state who are held responsible, not the bureaucracy. Most people aren't even aware who runs the DNR or any of these other agencies. And I'm just wondering, does it give you pause when we think about the need to have a political responsibility? The voters will look to the governor or the other persons that you have listed here as being held responsible for decisions that the DNR or other agencies are making. Where do we get that political responsibility if we eliminate this step?
Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Benson, for the question. I don't believe this is something that should be politicized. These are mining and timber leases that should be made on a professional basis based on science and the facts of the situation. And unfortunately, they have been politicized. And really, folks that didn't understand the ownership of their land got caught up in a political process where they thought they could come in and work with political interests to sway public opinion for or nay on their position, when even the political people, after much delay, realized that the facts presented by the science led them that these leases should be granted. So unfortunately, for the people that were hopeful that the Executive Council was going to rule in their favor, if they would have let the professionals deal with it, I think the science would have dictated what would be done. And as you know, the commissioner of the DNR serves at the will of the governor, and the governor is responsible to the people of Minnesota. So very much the DNR commissioner is responsible to the governor, and that's who he reports to. So I think, Representative Benson, I think this is a good bill that takes the politics out of something, but yet there is, people are accountable and need to be responsible, and it deals with the folks that are professionals, and whether they came from private industry or from the Nature Conservancy and Ducks Unlimited, where the current commissioner came from, or if they were an accountant like Commissioner Miriam was, that they come from different walks of life, the different professionals within the agency.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm just thinking about the fact that I suspect there are many people who are serving the legislature right now who are having a real tussle in their minds about, for example, the leasing that potentially will happen with the Polymet company, for example. And I think there are probably a lot of people who are planning to run for re-election or hoping that decision is made sometime after the next election. And I think it would be hard to believe that whatever the decision about that particular issue is made, that it will not impact our elected representatives and our elected governor and other people who serve in the state administration. So to suggest somehow that the DNR is separate or separated in some way from political reality that we all live in, I think is a stretch. But I have just one others, if I may be indulged, Mr. Chair. And that is my concern that when we have elections, many times we have a turn in which political party is going to make or promote these changes, either here at the Capitol or in the governorship. And it just seems to me that it's important that the will of the people at that particular time, based on who they elect, that the leadership then should be able to have direct control over policy that's being made. And I know that bureaucracies tend to have a life of their own. And they have all kinds of successful ways of thwarting the direct decision-making of the elected representatives of this state. And I know in certain countries, for example, we don't want to pick on the French too much, but the bureaucracy in France, for example, basically runs the country. And they know that the elected officials serve for a time and then they're gone. And they continue on, and they have all kinds of means to thwart the directives coming from the political branch. And it's one of the reasons, Mr. Chair, that I have never felt that having term limits is a good idea. I think legislators should term limit themselves, but that the voters ought to make that decision, because when you term limit, then the bureaucracy really is given carte blanche almost to run the political system in a particular state. So, Mr. Chairman, reluctantly, I will be voting in opposition to your bill.
Well, first I want to, for the record,
if there is a vote.
This has nothing to do with Polymet. It has it has nothing to do with Polymet mining. It is about drilling.
Right.
It is about trying to quantify what resources are available to both the state, the federal government, but they have their own process, and individuals. But this is particularly with regard to school trust lands that this drilling is done on all types of different lands that are owned by the public, so that it would be like the state having a bank account and no one knowing how much was in it.
Right.
And recently we had an example of having people who had no idea how to balance the statement, and that was the Executive Council.
Yeah.
Because they both times they reneged on, or they did not pass the recommendations of their own department, which they can do, and then they later came back and passed them.
Yeah.
And there was nothing that was changed about those proposals. The proposals went forward as stated. And so
Mr. Chair.
I wanted to put on the record that you must believe in term limits, you're leaving. And secondly is
self-imposed.
Is that this has nothing to do with Polymet. Further questions?
Right.
Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I didn't mean to bring in the issue of polymet other than just an illustration of how really major decisions that can affect the long-term prosperity or detriment of a state like Minnesota can be affected when a decision is given to a bureaucratic decision-making process rather than ultimately, I think decisions have to be made for good or ill by democratically elected representatives of the people. And we could argue that, an authoritarian system with the good king never errs, but I go with democracy on that issue.
Well, Representative Benson, there are 201 of us that are elected by the people. Right. And from time to time we make a decision that affects other agencies. We do it all the time at the DNR and the PCA. So I'm not sure that I agree with you that we aren't elected to represent the people.
Oh, yeah,
and,
that's not what he said. I did not
say
that.
That's what I hear, but you say it again, please, so that I understand it.
No, I'm saying quite the opposite, Mr. Chairman. I'm suggesting that having the executive council make the final decision is the ultimate political accountability of decisions that are made here by the state. And I want to see that we have every opportunity for the elected officials of our state to be the final arbiter of these things, for good or ill, because that's part of the democratic process. And I'm concerned about the growth of bureaucratic inertia, and they tend, and it's the history of countries is that bureaucracies tend to grow and they aggregate power to themselves in every opportunity they have. And the less bureaucracy, in my opinion, the better.
And Representative Benson, the governor can veto this bill if it were to land on his desk. So there is your representation. Representative McNamara.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the discussion. And I think the most important thing, and I think, Mr. Chair, it would be best if we just laid the bill over. But if I could say, I really think that it's not good for the process to have the executive council involved in these leases. They're very science-based, as you talked. It's about exploration of folks that own the mineral rights on land, and they're looking for exploration to see what's there. And I think it gave false expectations to some people that didn't own the mineral rights. And I just think it would be better if it was in the hands of the DNR. And I hope we can continue to have this discussion. I think it's a good policy going forward, and I appreciate the committee's time.
One of the things that troubles me about this whole thing is that the irresponsibility of people who are landowners. They are completely irresponsible to own a piece of land, to borrow money against it potentially, and not know who owns what. And the people up in my district that came running down here to the Capitol and Fox in the hen house have had on their deeds minerals are severed to the state of Minnesota, but they apparently can't read. And then they come down here and make a play that says, mine have been severed since the day I bought my properties. Some have not. James J. Hill, many others have the mineral rights.
That's right.
Some have, the federal government has surface rights on land in the Superior National Forest, and the state owns the mineral rights, and we can't get to them unless there's drilling. So really, I think the responsibility, when it comes all down to it, is if you want to make sure when you buy a piece of land that you own both parts, not one.
Right.
And then we wouldn't be having this discussion. Right. And we wouldn't be worrying about the executive council, because the people could say that own both parts, no. But the problem is the state, everybody in the state owns what's below a lot of lands, especially up in the Northeast where there are minerals. And that's what the problem is. That's not going to get fixed. But the chair moves to lay the bill over. This bill will come back for a vote, so be prepared.
Okay.
Next bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next, I would like to move House File 2098. It's a bill that deals with aquatic plant management. I believe it, again, is the possibility of would either go to GovOps or be laid over, Mr. Chair, and if it'd be okay, maybe you want to have the discussion and we can see how it goes, or...
We'll take the same approach.
Okay, thank you,
Representative McNamara moves the bill, bring it forward to the committee. House File 2098. There are no amendments. Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This deals with an issue some of us are familiar with about the maximum fee the DNR can charge for aquatic plant management permits. Under current law, it's $750. DNR had proposed at one time that they be, I want to say, $2,500. Thank you. Actually, at one time, I believe they proposed them as high as $9,000. They're in rulemaking to make them go to $2,500. I think it's hard to justify that the actual costs incurred by the DNR are this high. It encourages folks to do them individually, and in a lot of cases, it'll make for a lot more paperwork for the DNR. There's instances where these are good to do a mass permit from a lake association, and I think it would be good if we could put this to keep it at the $750 that's in the current budget, and I would stand for questions. I believe this one the DNR may have feelings on, Mr. Chair. I don't think it's going to be neutral.
Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know whether the DNR has feelings about it, but I certainly do. So what's going on here is these permits are permits to take native plants that are fishing habitat. Okay? That's what these permits are for. And so somebody has to pay for the processing of these permits. And right now, it's being paid for by boat owners, fishermen, and hunters. And you have to ask yourself, is it fair, particularly for fishermen, to pay to have the habitat taken away that spawns the fish? And so that's what your bill does. And the fairness issue is just too great for me to even begin to go down that route. That's the way it has been in the past. DNR is moving a little bit away from that to have the people who benefit pay, the people who want to take the native plants away and to take the fishing habitat away, and have them pay for it rather than the fishermen and the hunters and the boat owners. This just doesn't meet the fairness test, Mr. Chairman, and if we do vote on it, I would like a roll call.
Question by other members? Being none, DNR? Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Weiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative McNamara, I guess I have a little confusion. I want to make sure I understand this. Last year when this came up, I had added an amendment on the floor at the behest of my some of the lakeshore owners in my area to manage this portion of that. Did that amendment go off in conference committee?
I don't recall that it did. Representative Wagenius?
I believe that DNR should answer this, but I think there were two fees. One did, one didn't.
Let's have the DNR. Oh, you're up. Welcome, Mr. Meyer.
Mr. Chair, members, for the record, Bob Meyer, Department of Natural Resources. To Representative Isaacson's questions, I believe all the aquatic plant management issues were dropped in the conference committee during the budget proposal last year. So where we were at, this document I handed out, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but this provides you with the chronological detail of the fees and then some fiscal information on there. We had this discussion back in, actually I believe Representative McNamara was the chief author of the bill that raised these fees from $750 to $2,500, raised the cap back 2009, 10, something like that. And then we, as an agency, wanted to go down the road of raising all of the fees to help close that gap of the cost of game and fish and water rec accounts, which are the hunters and anglers and boaters, versus the private property owners. You guys had a lot of conversation on that. Representative Wagenius carried the language that we had in the governor's budget recommendation to raise those fees. At the end of the day, they weren't done. So we went back and we did promulgate this rule that raised the fee from $750 to $2,500. But it's important to realize this is the cap fee for a whole lake. So if you have 10 property owners, you're paying $75, and now under this fee you'd pay $250. There's information here that shows the amount that would be impacted by this rule. Actually, there's 22 lakes, 52 permits that have 22 plus members that are at the cap, which is 750. This would raise that to 39,000. The net increase of this rule is $22,000 statewide. So this isn't like it's hitting property owners in the pocket very much. So, and that cap just goes from $750 per lake, as I said, to $2,500 per lake. The rule is promulgated. We are waiting for the 45 legislative days to expire so it can go into effect. It was presented before session, so now if the 2014 legislative session goes 45 legislative days, which I'm thinking it probably will, the rule will go into effect. So we're trying to close that gap. We're also looking at trying to manage our expenditures. How can we do this more efficiently, more effectively? Trying to reduce the amount of site visits that we have to do. If a lake owners group or a lakeshore group has a permit that they treat the same spot every year, and it's where we know and the plants are the type that we know of and the treatments are approved by us, we're reducing the administrative time on those permits. We're trying to do some electronic permits that are out there. So we are trying to reduce our costs as well. We just feel that the bill as it stands right now, the statute 103G.615 sub 2 is a good piece of policy and helps us move forward. And that rule, as I said, is sitting on the ALJ's desk waiting to be adopted after 45 days.
Question. Representative Fischer.
I apologize. I'm now slightly confused. So if I'm understanding what I'm hearing is that you're saying that the fee would be only $2,500. Well, the way it is written right now would be $2,500 or $750 if the amendment is successful, that the fee would only be $750 per lake or per permit per lake?
Mr. Chair, Representative Fischer, it's per lake. You'll see on 1.11 says the fees shall not exceed. So this is the cap fee that's out there. So the way it works right now, and it might be better if you want to look at this table, and I can bring down staff if we need to get into this more. On page 3, the top of page 3 here on this handout is a table that says proposed APM fees in the 2014 rule. And actually it's going from 25 to 35 as well, I believe. So you can see that there's one permit with 2,926 properties there, and that revenue is 102. It's the maximum fee is there. This is, I guess, it's not as easy to understand as I thought it was. But so, if you live on a lake that has 20 people, and you all want to treat your lake, so you go into a permit for your lake, which a lot of the lakes do. Right now, the permit fee for that, the maximum fee for that permit for all 20 people is $750. The proposed rule will raise that maximum fee, so it's $750 divided by 20 people. The proposed rule that we have promulgated will raise that fee from $750 to $2,500, which would still be divided by 25 people. So, or by 20 people or however many people you have. So the incremental cost, the more people you have, the less of an increase it will be, so to speak. That makes any sense at all? White Bear Lake, for example, I think the White Bear Lake Property Owners Association.
Yeah.
Oh, I would say there's probably 100 people, maybe, who want to treat. And then you also have to get into 50% or 15% of the littoral zone. So there's other parameters that are there. But let's just say 100 people, for example, at that $750 cap, they're only paying $7.50 per person for that permit. And it's always worked. The applicator usually applies for the permit, and then they work that $750 into your cost per foot. So rather than $750 now, when we raise this to $2,500, each shoreland owner, each property owner would be paying $25 rather than $7.50. And as I said, the fiscal note on this bill is $22,000. So we're talking about statewide raising shoreland property owners fees for treating aquatic plants, $22,000 is the net impact of this.
Questions by the committee? Representative Isaac.
So to make sure I completely understand this, what Representative McNamara is trying to do is change that rule they have on the table that's waiting 45 days and say it's $750 no matter what per lake.
Put it in statute.
Perfect. That's what I want to know. Thank you.
Further questions? Representative McNamara.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like you to lay it over.
Okay. Anyone from the audience like to testify for or against the bill?
Did he? I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I was talking to Mr. Meyer, and I didn't hear Representative Isaacson if he asked a question. I apologize.
I answered this question for him. You're trying to limit the fee to $750 rather than have the rule go into place, or if it did go into place, that we change it from $2,500 back to $750. Is that correct?
Correct, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Isaacson, for the question.
Mr. Ness.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, Lance Ness, President of Anglers for Habitat. We oppose the bill.
Okay. Thank you. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a point of clarification. Mr. Meyer, I see he's left, but I just want to make, he's back. I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. I mean, you take a lake like Lake Minnetonka versus Lake Alice, and all the permitting for the entire lake for the aquatic plant management on Lake Minnetonka is $2,500, and on Lake Alice it's $2,500 for all of them. That's what I thought I heard you testifying to. It's per lake, not per permit.
Mr. Meyer.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fabian, this is the cap fee, so it cannot exceed that amount. There's also a per property charge that's there that this max applies to. So right now, and I can bring Steve Enger down if you want more clarification. Right now, I believe it's $25 per permit. Well, we have Mr. Enger come down and you can just explain how this works more clearly. But there's a per property fee, and what we're talking about is the maximum cap per lake, per applicator permit, basically. Hopefully I didn't screw that up.
Mr. Chair.
The committee, introduce yourself, please.
My name is Steve Enger. I'm the Aquatic Plant Management Program Coordinator at the Department of Natural Resources.
Go ahead. Do you know the question?
I believe I understand the question.
Then if you would please give us the answer.
Yeah. Chairman Dill, members of the committee, the permit fee cap is based on the number of properties that are on a single permit. It's not a permit that would be issued to an entire lake or basin. So when a permit hits at the current cap, when a permit hits 21 properties, they each then begin to realize a reduction in the permit fee. So we have some permits that are in excess of $100. The cap is $750. So each of those people would be paying $7.50 to participate on that permit. But a basin might have a number of permits. An individual might get a permit. There might be a number of group party permits on that basin, but the cap is applied to the permits.
Well, I would like to clarify, because I think I understand from Mr. Meyer's answer different than what I thought, and Lake Minnetonka may be a good one. If they do a milfoil control in one bay of Lake Minnetonka and 20 property owners go together, under current law, they're charged $750. If they do that at the other end of the lake on another bay with 20 property owners together, do they get to do it for free then, or do they have to get a permit and pay a fee also?
Chairman Dill, Representative McNamara, the permits for invasive aquatic plant management, if this were a lake-wide permit to manage invasive species, would be issued free of charge. And there might be more than one on those basins because they're considered separate basins like Lake Minnetonka, but they would be issued with For the lake-wide management of invasive species, those permits would be issued without permit fee.
One information, Mr. Chair.
Representative Isaacson.
This bill applies to non-invasive aquatic species. Milfoil is an invasive, so when you use the example, you'd want to say a non-invasive, just so that doesn't confuse the answer.
And I was just going to clarify that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
screwed up on the example I used. Let's use a non-invasive species, and if a permit on one bay of Lake Minnetonka was applied for and they were given a fee, if a different group of property owners on the other end of the lake applied, do they not need to pay a fee? They get it for free?
If you apply for a permit that requires a permit fee, you pay the permit fee.
So, Mr. Chair and members, there can be multiple permits on a single lake. And are there currently on Lake Minnetonka more than one permit given?
Yes.
Thank you. That was all.
Okay, Representative Isaacson, did you have more?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To make sure that I'm clear, when I look at this chart that you handed out here on page 3, can you help me understand? It says properties per permit is 1. That means there's 2,900 properties at $35 apiece, raising $102,000.
Yes.
If we have properties per permit between 2 and 71, is it $35 per property? Up to $2,500?
Yes, that's the proposal.
And then automatically, so once we've reached $2,500, then it just divides out and goes down, and then automatically 72 to 173 is just going to be $2,500 for the fee, right?
Yes.
And when you say per basin rather than, can you help me understand that?
When I'm talking about basins in Lake Minnetonka, it's a little different story. It has one Division of Waters inventory number, but it's broken up into several different basins. So the limits apply.
That's all. That was a very good clarification. Thank you.
Representative Benson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to bottom line to clarify for me, and this is for Mr. Meyer. When Representative Wagenius was talking about who's paying for all these things, whether it's the anglers or others. First of all, is her characterization of who's paying basically correct under the present situation?
Members, yes. If you go to page 2 of the document that we were just referring to, there's some tabular data that shows our APM expenditures per fiscal year, and you can see on the top table it's ecological water resources, enforcement, fish and wildlife, and then there's a total number there. I'll just use 2013. Our total expenditures were $777,672. Of that amount, permittees paid in fees only $211,742. So that's roughly a gap of $566,000. That was subsidized by the Game and Fish Fund and the Water Recreation Account, which is paid for through boater registrations, and the Game and Fish Fund is funded through hunting and fishing licenses.
So just a quick last follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Meyer, this proposed legislation, does that ameliorate or exacerbate the problem some of us see here with relying on fees from anglers and others? Does this legislation reduce that problem, or does it exacerbate it?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Benson, this legislation would increase the contributions from the Game and Fish and Water Rec by approximately $22,000.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Russo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just attempting to clarify some of this. One of the things that seems to be getting lost in the discussion is that anybody can decide they're going to do their own land and apply for one permit and pay the $35, and that the question of the group permits is strictly a voluntary association of landowners on the shores of the lake that want to get together and permit it together and take care of the issue together, and that in those cases, if there's enough of them banding together, they get a discount. The chart is a little more complicated than it needs to be, because really the only thing the amounts of revenue coming from the various sizes of lakes and whatnot is interesting. But the main point in that chart is that the break point happens between 71 and 72 properties getting together. That below that point, $35 times 71 people is below 71 properties is below 2,500, and $35 times 72 properties is above 2,500. So that's where your break point comes. If we make it at 25, keep it at 2,500. If, on the other hand, we go to 750, then that break point is between 21 and 22.
Further questions? Bill's laid over. Well,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let me just ask a question. Anyone else like to testify for or against the bill? I didn't sense there was. Okay, bill's laid over. Meeting adjourned.